8% of our SMEs trade across one European border, and we only have around 8% of the world's unicorns, meaning scalable, innovative businesses. Well, should we give up? Absolutely not. So Scale Matters is a new series where we are inviting interesting guests to discuss exactly this. How can we make Europe more innovative, more investment friendly, more scalable, and break down internal market barriers? So I'm very pleased opening this first episode of our new series, Scale Matters, and I think I have one of the most prominent guests on regulation and business here, the MEP Eva Maydell. And let me just introduce you briefly. You are a member of the European Parliament, an MEP as we call it, for the EPP group. Right now you are leading areas like the microchips, the CHIPS Act, as we call it, artificial intelligence, the Data Act, and you have always been known to have like a very open attitude and listening to all the stakeholders. Thank you so much for coming.
That's very kind. Thank you for having me.
In 2017, you were awarded the New Technologies Award, and in your speech afterwards, you said, "I want to make an era in Europe where, innovation is the new norm on regulation on everything we do." Now, 5 years later, looking back, do you think that Europe has become more competitive, and is it like we created this new norm of thinking, okay, regulation is like promoting innovation?
I think, indeed, see myself and maybe known a little bit as this sort of a tech optimist. But more and more you also need to be a tech realist. Whether innovation has become the new norm, I would say it has definitely become the norm to understand the importance of innovation in Europe. I think where we have failed in this goal is to equip ourselves with the right tools to achieve this, innovation happening on the continent. I think when we speak about innovation, it should not be just in a protectionist way or in some sort of a response to something that has happened. I think we need to have the bigger picture in mind.
So let's focus at what we're coming at today, so the European scale-ups and the growth of European business. If we look at the positives, we have around 20% increase in European scale-ups for the last decade. And by 2018, I think there was around 7,000 scale-ups, and they raised around 100 billion in investment capital. However, this is like a third, relatively, it's a third of what we see in the US. We right now have around 8% of the world's unicorns, and there was a considerable drop when we saw UK leaving the EU. There is something in the market that we haven't really managed to achieve, but can we somehow address that, and what can we do better from a policy perspective?
Well, I think there's a couple of points. So first of all, I think over the past couple of years, technology has developed at a pace that has never developed before. Hence, regulation had to develop itself for the first time ever. How do we make sure that those scale-ups, those unicorns, are to stay in Europe, but most importantly, how do we make sure that there will be more of those, right? Having capital markets union that we've been talking for longer than we've been working particularly on it will be helpful for that sector. Secondly, of course, also I believe the unicorns will say it's not all about the money, it's about the skills, it's about the advantages you have in operating in the single market. Perhaps it's time for us to look at the single market and say, hold on a second, there's perhaps some legislation that's outdated out there, others that needs to be changed, and third, that can make it easier for companies to operate. But we need to, be very critical on what we've achieved and what could be achieved more. If it's easier elsewhere, I don't think, if you're a unicorn, you'll think twice what your decision will be.
Looking at some of the regulations, we've had GDPR. GDPR is world famous, very good regulation. I think everybody thought it was timely. I think if you ask businesses, did it make it more competitive? I'm pretty sure that they would say no. How can we, now the AI Act is coming out, okay, for AI mostly, maybe not in the future, but right now we need data for the AI, right? Of course. So if we don't dare to use the data, and you're not sure what's in high risk, many companies will say, okay, let's not do it here, let's just do the research abroad, right?
So first of all, I absolutely agree. How are we going to, have this groundbreaking solution found through AI in Europe if we do not know how to use data and how to utilize it? And I think that's a fundamental problem we have, to understand that in order for us to be excelling in AI, we need data. And we have an issue in Europe of how we use data, of course. Secondly, I think when it comes to this sort of very robust and big legislative processes, one of the most important parts is implementation and how this legislation will be implemented. You hear that from big, small, from scale-ups. People want regulatory certainty. People don't want to be as thrown into the wild west of no regulation. And I think, it's the smart way to go ahead when we see regulation as a force for good, when it comes to cyber threats, when it comes to hybrid threats, and so on and so forth. But now the big question is, how do we regulate? How do we do that? That is in a balanced way, that doesn't, hamper innovation, that in the end, it will be better off for SMEs to have that regulation. I would say the CHIPS Act. I can't necessarily call it a visionary type of file, but it's at least a file that is not trying to think about the past. He's trying to think also about the future and where Europe will be positioned in that particular field in the next 10, 15 and more years to come. It's already a step in the right direction in securing the most important thing we need for our next technological industrial revolutions to come, because those will come much more often now. Just establishing the EU was visionary. What is our next big vision for Europe? And this does not come with one act and with one file and with funding here and there. This requires, an in-depth discussion. I don't have the answers, but I think it's worth sitting down, European leaders sitting down and brainstorming on something like that.
Okay, a lot of good input for how we can optimize the single market, how we can do better tech regulation in the future, and also what's at the table at the moment. We need to tap into the world of data on digital, and there's still a lot to do, and still a lot of collaboration. Thank you, Eva, for coming here today and filling us in on your visions.
Thanks very much for having me. As you said, there's still a lot to do, so let's roll our sleeves and get to work.
26 regulations have been implemented, 50, 60 nearly, still to come. So how do we make sure that SMEs and European companies can grow and innovate and tap into the potential of data? Well, maybe the solution is sandboxing, involving SMEs and scale-ups in the policy-making process at a much earlier stage. Sandboxing and finding out what the effects and benefits are of these regulations and how they affect the market at a very early stage before they become regulation. So thank you so much for listening in, and see you in the next episode of Scale Matters.